After the crash on Sprint Saturday at Le Mans, I really thought that was it for Marc Marquez. How much more can this man take? And that's exactly what I said on my roundup of Le Mans. This has got to be it now for Marc Marquez. What more has he got to prove? He's just going to do himself some real damage. But write off Marc Marquez at your peril, because Marc Marquez, once again, is back. And this 2026 championship is well back as a title race, not just a one-man race, not even a two-man race for the Aprilias. We now have 5 riders within 50 points, or maybe it's even 6 within 50 points. There are 6 within 50 points. Pecco Bagnaia sits now P7, 53 points behind your championship leader, Marco Bezzecchi. And there was a great graphic I saw that saw how Marc Marquez has pulled the gap back to Marco Bezzecchi, 62 points on the championship leader since Mugello. Unbelievable from Marc Marquez. A sprint P3 and a win on Sunday. Quite incredible from Marc Marquez this weekend. His teammate Pecco Bagnaia continues his hero or zero form. Pecco Bagnaia seems to either be really good, and that relies on him getting a good start, which is exactly what he got both on Sprint Saturday and on Sunday this weekend. He managed to win the sprint from Marc Marquez and Ogura. The other way around, Ogura was second, and in the main race managed to get P3. But even though he led early on, once Marc Marquez got past him, Ogura picked him off pretty quickly, and Digi wasn't far behind at the end of the race. And he continues this form of, if Pecco Bagnaia gets overtaken, his momentum just seems to go all over the shop, and he's really susceptible to fall even further down the field. Fortunately, he still managed to get a podium, but once again, continues that form of being a hero out in P1. If he's in the pack, he just cannot seem to cope with that Ducati. But nevertheless, for Pecco Bagnaia, he is on some good form, at least on a Sunday recently, with 4 third place in a row. I mean, Barcelona being the first one of those 4 wasn't necessarily handed to him, but he was certainly helped by a lot of incidents in front, even with Joan Mir losing that time at the end of the race through that time penalty through low tyre pressure. But Brno was a good round for Pecco Bagnaia. Now, in terms of the main headline from this event is Marco Bezzecchi crashing out of the sprint on Saturday, which in itself is lost points, but not a massive headline. But Bez then went on to strike a marshal and as such was suspended from the Sunday round. A real massive mistake, and if he loses the title because of that and loses the title by less than, say, 15 or 16 points, because it's not guaranteed that Bez would have won on Sunday. He wasn't doing all that well on Saturday. He's a different beast on a Sunday, is Marco Bezzecchi, it seems, this year. He's not seeming to really hook it up on a Saturday. But if you say he maybe would have finished third, if he loses this championship by less than 16 points, then you can say that this was well and truly the mistake that cost Marco Bezzecchi the title. But Bez being out of the race meant that for everybody else, there was 25 points up for grabs. And the title fight is now and well and truly on. I mean, on Saturday, the guys on TNT Sport were saying that Marc Marquez was back in it. He's in some really good form. But he was 72 points behind this weekend at the start of it. And I thought there's no way that Marc Marquez can get back into it unless Bezzecchi has a disastrous weekend. And that's exactly what happened. Of course, no points scored in the sprint. Didn't take place in the main race. Marc managed to win the main race, get 7 points from the sprint, which meant that gap has more or less halved. He was 72 points behind before the weekend. Now he is only 40 points behind. And considering now with the sprints in MotoGP, there are 37 points on offer in a weekend, it is certainly not done. Marc Marquez benefited, everybody benefited, but I think Jorge Martin was the biggest beneficiary of this because he had a double long lap penalty to serve after causing that crash at the first corner. Skittles, really, at Balaton Park. Last time out. But he got a double long lap penalty. He managed to salvage probably what he could salvage from that, given a poor qualifying really only on the 4th row. He managed to finish in P9, and without his teammate being suspended, there is no doubt that Bezzecchi would have finished above 9th, and therefore Martin wouldn't have been able to gain. But going into Sunday, Hart Martin was 15 points behind Bez, 7 points gained, and the gap is now only 8. Looking at the rest of the guys in the championship standings, Digi is only a further 15 back. He's 23 back, and he's the rider that seems to be in, once again, some good form across the season. Some real high points for Digi, but more or less he's always there or thereabouts, a solid figure on the Ducati this year. And I think that is what it is all going to be about, being dependable and being there. And Marco Bezzecchi really was that man before this episode, and certainly the last few rounds, where Marc Marquez in particular has been able to claw back the momentum. And that Aprilia momentum seems to have gone away a little bit. Ogura was the main challenger to the two Ducatis this weekend and really should have either got the race win or the sprint race win, but didn't manage to pick up either. But it was still Ogura on the podium with those two factory Ducatis on Saturday and Sunday. The main challenger though, Ogura this weekend, again in good Sunday form. Looking at the last 5 rounds for Ogura, that's now 2 podiums for him and 2 fourth places. Like Digi, somebody who's in good form momentum wise. Pedro Acosta unfortunately had a mechanical failure in the main race, but he's still in there, 48 behind. I think, as I've discussed earlier on in the season though, I don't think that KTM package is strong enough to take it to Ducati and Aprilia across all of the circuits. And then Bagnaia sits in P7, 53 points behind. So a lot of talking points this weekend. Marco Bezzecchi very much the loser from that weekend. Marc Marquez probably the main gainer from that weekend. Jorge Martin though, from a mental perspective, probably the biggest gainer, because this could have been a really bad round for Jorge Martin. Say that he doesn't gain any points on Bez in the sprint, so where did he finish? Was he about 5th or 6th? So 3 or 4 points there that he wouldn't have gained, and then probably lost to Bezzecchi in the main race. We could be talking about Martin still being 25, 30 points back from Bez, but as such, he is only single figures behind now. And what is it, 8 points? If he finishes first in the next race at Assen, and Bez finishes second, then that gap comes down once again to 3 points. So it is really, really close in that title charge. Marc Marquez is now as close as he has ever been for a long, long time. He was 102 points back after Mugello, or maybe before Mugello, but really good stuff, really exciting now. We've got a title charge between a lot of riders, and next weekend we've got back-to-back race. We've got the Dutch TT this weekend coming, and last year on Sunday it was Marquez followed by Bez, Marc Marquez followed by Bez. There's a rhyming thing coming on here. And then Pecco Bagnaia was in third. Well, why not the same order again? We're going into every weekend now with Marquez, Bez, Bagnaia, Martin, Ogura. Raul Fernandez wasn't really there this weekend. Pedro Acosta on his day. Digi. Honestly, going into qualifying, going into Q2 now, you just go, I've no idea who's going to get on pole. But that qualifying session on a Saturday is so important, because if you're out of those first 2 rows, you could see in the race yesterday how the field really spread. Those front 3 went. Digi was really on his own. I think, was he battling with Acosta at some point? Possibly. But more or less towards the end, Digi was on his own. I think he was, because he pulled away massively from Pedro Acosta once he got past Pedro, and then Pedro had a mechanical failure later on. But we have got 8 or 9 riders that going into any weekend could win a race. But Marc Marquez is back competitive again. Unbelievably, once again. But speaking of the Marquez brothers, Alex Marquez back as well. That is unbelievable for him to be back so soon. You'd have expected him probably to have took the season out, or at least a lot longer than he has done. I think these MotoGP riders are of a completely different breed. But I'll see you once again for another roundup of the Dutch DT. DT? The Dutch DT. I've done it again. The Dutch TT. This time next week. This MotoGP season is turning out to be a great one so far. I don't even think we're halfway through it yet, and there are so many headlines that have happened so far this year. This has been a great season so far. 2025 as a Marc Marquez fan was a great year, but 2026 as a neutral, still a Marc Marquez fan, but wanting to see more action. And of course, that unpredictability, we have got it absolutely everywhere, every week in MotoGP. Leave down below what you think is going to happen at Assen. But you know what? For the main race on Sunday, I'm going to go for a repeat of what happened last year.